The cafeteria buzzed with the familiar noise of clinking trays, casual chatter, and the occasional burst of laughter from the corner table where the young soldiers gathered. The smell of coffee was thick in the air, masking the faint scent of bleach from the morning cleanup. In the farthest corner, near the wall where a faded bulletin board displayed outdated announcements, sat an old woman, quiet, small, and easy to overlook. Her hair was silver, pulled back into a neat bun. Her jacket was worn, the color faded from years of use, the elbows patched neatly by hand. In front of her sat a small bowl of soup, steam curling upward, untouched for several minutes. She held a paper cup of water, cradling it between her hands as though its warmth might seep into her bones. No one looked her way. Some assumed she was just someone's grandmother waiting for a ride. Others thought she might be one of the local volunteers who helped in the kitchen from time to time. No one asked. No one greeted her. And in a place where uniforms and rank dictated social circles, she seemed invisible. Private Tyler was clearing tables near her, stacking trays with the hurried efficiency of someone who didn't want extra duty. He glanced at her once, offered a polite nod, then moved on. The young soldiers nearby were laughing about weekend plans, swapping stories about cars and girlfriends, too absorbed to notice the woman in the corner. If you had walked in at that moment, you might have missed her too. She was the kind of person life had taught to be still, to take up as little space as possible. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, searching, almost restless, as if they had once looked upon places and events the rest of the room couldn't imagine. The cafeteria doors swung open with a sudden rush of air, pulling everyone's attention. A man entered, and silence spread like a ripple on still water. He was tall, his posture sharp and commanding. The stars on his shoulders caught the light, 4 of them, gleaming against the deep navy of his dress uniform. A 4-star general. Conversations died instantly. Soldiers straightened in their seats. Even the kitchen staff paused mid-task. The general scanned the room with a deliberate, assessing gaze, as though he was searching for someone. And then, he saw her. For a fraction of a second, his face softened, the corners of his mouth pulling into the faintest smile. Without hesitation, he began walking toward the far corner. Every eye followed him. The young privates shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, silently wondering who this old woman was to command such focus from the highest-ranking officer they'd ever seen in person. When he reached her table, he stopped. The general removed his cap, holding it to his chest. And then, in one deliberate motion, he saluted her. The room froze. The sound of his boots clicking together was crisp, unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the cafeteria. A few soldiers stood instinctively, not knowing why. She looked up slowly, as though waking from a distant thought. Her lips trembled, her hands still wrapped around the paper cup. "General," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of both surprise and recognition. "Colonel Whitaker," he replied with respect, lowering his salute but not his gaze. "Ma'am, it's an honor." And in that instant, the room's perception of her shattered. She wasn't just an old woman sitting quietly in the corner. She was a decorated officer, a trailblazer whose service had paved the way for many in that very room. The general pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I heard you were here," he said, his voice warm but laced with a reverence that only comes from shared history. "I wasn't going to miss the chance to thank you in person." She smiled faintly. "I thought everyone had forgotten." He shook his head firmly. "Not everyone." Over the next few minutes, whispers swept across the cafeteria. Phones discreetly came out, snapping photos. A young lieutenant leaned toward a sergeant, whispering, "Colonel Whitaker, wasn't she the one in?" "Yes," the sergeant cut in. "Operation Iron Shield. Saved an entire convoy after an ambush in '89. And that was just one of the things she did." The general and the colonel spoke quietly, their words drowned out by the hum of disbelief in the room. But fragments of her story began to emerge from those who knew her name. She had been one of the first women to lead a combat unit overseas. She'd navigated minefields, literally, and evacuated wounded soldiers under heavy fire. She'd earned medals, but rarely spoke of them. When the general finally stood, he extended his hand, and she rose slowly, her back still straight despite the years. He didn't just shake her hand, he embraced her. "We stand where we stand because you walked before us," he said, his voice low but carrying enough for those nearby to hear. There were no loud cheers, no dramatic music, just the still, heavy respect that fills a room when something truly meaningful has taken place. As the general left, several soldiers approached her table. Some saluted, others simply offered their hands, their eyes shining with something like guilt and awe. Private Tyler, the one who had cleared the tables earlier, stood before her awkwardly. "Ma'am. I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking slightly. She patted his hand. "It's all right, son. Most people don't see past what's in front of them. But remember, every face you pass has a story." From that day on, she was never alone in that cafeteria. Young soldiers often sat with her, asking for advice, listening to her tales. Not of medals and victories, but of friendships forged in the dust of faraway places, of loss and resilience, of what it truly meant to serve something greater than yourself. And though she never sought recognition, the moment that four-star general walked in and saluted her became something of a legend on base. Not because of the rank he wore, but because of the truth it revealed, that greatness often sits quietly among us, unnoticed, until someone with the courage to remember calls it into the light. In time, the bulletin board behind her was updated, not with announcements, but with photos of her younger days in uniform, her unit gathered around a dusty truck in the middle of the desert, her arm around fellow soldiers with smiles that belied the danger surrounding them. Underneath, someone had written in bold letters. "Respect is not given to rank. It's given to those who earn it." And in the quiet moments when the cafeteria wasn't so busy, she would sip her coffee, watching the new generation laugh and argue and live, and know, deep in her heart, that they would one day carry the same invisible weight she had carried. But they would do it a little better, perhaps, because they had been reminded that even the quietest person in the room might be a hero.